All right, everyone, today we are here to talk about our RB Digital Dip Tank setup. We have a full set of consumables that are used within this process. The two main products that you'll be using are our dip solution. We have here a 5-gallon and a 1-gallon, which we'll explain afterwards, followed by our screen wash, which actually has a built-in degreaser. So you do not need to actually degrease the screens after the reclaim process. If it is the first time that you are getting a screen ready to go and prepped, you might want to have a separate degreaser to degrease the screen, which we do have if it's straight from the factory. We also have here two of the other tools that we'll be using, which is just a square brush, which is ideal for getting into the tough corners, and a really nice poly brush with a handle that basically allows you to scrub the rest of the screen. So this is probably the one investment I tell every shop, regardless of the size, that they need to make. And every shop is blown away when they bring this in if they've been doing the traditional reclaim process for a long time. The reclaim process is the dirtiest part of the entire screen print operation that everybody hates doing. Every shop's kind of got their own way of getting people to do it, whether it's like a punishment for coming in late or an entry-level position for someone who eventually is going to go through the entire process of everything involved in screen printing. It's usually where people start. Something that nobody really wants to do, but we found a way that really improves it, not only on a cleanliness aspect, but also in terms of cost savings, which is what we're all after here. On average, a shop who's reclaiming about 50 screens per week will see a return on investment in about 3 months. I mean, obviously it depends on your labor costs and all that kind of stuff, but it's generally a good rule of thumb that you'll see a return on investment. Well, how are you seeing the return on investment? Mostly with a 50% savings on labor and about up to a 70% savings on chemical costs. The biggest challenge with traditional reclaim is that all the chemicals that you are spraying are just going down the drain. Whereas with the dip tank, it holds the chemical in there, and as long as you're using it properly, it's got a very long shelf life. Actually is no shelf life at all. Your chemical will go much longer than everything else that's being sprayed and going down the drain. What's unique about our solution is that if it's used properly, the solids will actually be trapped and suspended, so you won't get a lot of sludge that's on the bottom that you see with a lot of the traditional dip tank setups. So as long as you follow all of the proper steps, which we'll be outlining here today, you will have a better reclaimed screen while saving money, which is at the end of the day what we're all after. So you're probably sitting here wondering, how do I actually save money on labor? I understand how I'm going to be saving money on the consumables because it's not going down the drain, but how am I saving money? And the main way that you are saving money on labor is by reducing the amount of steps that are required in the reclaim process. So with the traditional standard reclaim process, you're looking at roughly 8 steps. This is after the screen has already been prepped, which we'll show you shortly. So traditionally, you'd have to apply the solvent and scrub, followed by a rinse. Then you'd have to apply the emulsion remover and scrub, followed by a second rinse, apply stain remover and scrub, followed by a third rinse, finally applying a degreaser and scrub, and then doing a final rinse. So you're looking at 8 steps total. Now with the dip tank process, we brought that down to 4 steps. So you're popping the screen in the tank for about a minute to a minute and a half, and that can depend on the concentration that you've opted to go with or the life of the chemical already that you've been using. So basically with our process, you dip it in the tank, you would rinse it, you'd apply the RB screen wash with the built-in degreaser, and then you'd rinse that. So 4 steps total. Okay, so we're here with Dennis, our screen print specialist, and he's going to go over what is involved to prep your screen for the reclaim process. Now this will apply to whether you are using a dip tank or whether you're using a traditional screen print reclamation process, which we covered previously. So what he's going to achieve here is he's basically going to remove the PMI tape. It's a specialty tape that we use to protect the sides of the screens and make sure you don't get any ink on it. That's the beauty of the PMI tape. One quick peel and it all comes off. You're not sitting there having to pick, wasting time and having leftover adhesive. Followed by carting off the excess ink. Now obviously the better you cart off your screen, the less ink you'll have on the screen and the less you will dilute your chemical in the tank. So take your time, do a good job, remove as much excess ink as possible before starting your dip process. So now we're in our reclaim area, a scene that most of you guys are very familiar with. Before we fill up the tank, I want to go over some of the features in our new Easiway Dip Tank. The first is a drip tray. So you would have your screen in the tank, you'd pull it out, and you could actually set it on the top of the tank, and basically the excess chemical would drip off and go back into the tank. So something new that Easiway has added, which again is only going to reduce your chemical costs, okay? The second, screens float, as we all know. So there's a hold down bar here. So once you pop your screen in there and you start reclaiming your other screen, you put this bar on and it just keeps it submerged underneath all of the chemical. Now in terms of dilution, there are different levels of dilution that you can go with. We usually recommend going 5 parts water, 1 part chemical. Some shops like to go with 7 parts water, 1 part chemical. At the end of the day, if you just dilute the chemical more, all it'll do is take slightly longer for the reclaim process to happen. 5 to 1 is a good rule of thumb for us. That's what we like using. It is very, very important, okay? Friendly tip here, put your water in first, followed by the chemical. If you put the chemical first, then the water, you'll have a lot of bubbling and some overflow. It'll take you longer to actually get this set up properly. So once again, can't stress it enough, water first, followed by chemical. Now we'll let Dennis show you guys how to get that done properly.
All right, so when we're ready to fill our dip tank, we're gonna wanna put it in its final position. Just once it gets filled with the water and the solution, it's gonna be really heavy to move. So make sure it's nice and close to your washout bay. We don't want our screens dripping all over the floor. So we're gonna move this unit right up against the wall here, nice and close, and make sure it's nice and level.
So we wanted to demonstrate, again, because this happens so often at customers' locations, what happens when you put the chemical first, then the water. Basically, you'll get this bubbling issue where you'll get a bit of an overflow, and then you'll basically have to wait for the bubbles to drop or you'll have to scoop them out. But this is what we're trying to get you guys to avoid. 25 gallons of water, 5 gallons of chemical. If you need to top it off a little bit, you know, if you had to add 1 or 2 more gallons, that's perfectly fine. Not a big deal there, but again, this is what we're trying to avoid here.
All right, so now we're gonna be dunking our screen into our dip tank. So pop it in lengthwise and remember to put the bar over top so stay submerged, and set your timer.
So again, the main reason why we only want you guys to put 1 screen in at a time is often shops will jam 2 or 3 screens in here and they'll leave it in for an extended period of time. What starts to happen is the emulsion will actually break down into the tank, which will dilute the chemical, which will kill the amount of time that your chemical will actually function properly, and you'll build up a sludge at the bottom. But as long as you are following the step of 1 screen in, 1 screen out, and only leaving in there for about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes, then you'll avoid a lot of those issues.
All right, so we're ready to take our screen out, pop it up on the edge. You can put it in the dip tray for a second, make sure that all the chemical comes back into our dip tank here. If we saw that our emulsion was running off the screen, we knew we put it in there for too long.
Now, before you would actually start working on this screen, you'd pop your next screen into the dip tank. This kind of helps you keep your pace. You should be able to reclaim this, like we said, in about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes tops. It really depends on how quick that you're working. A skilled operator who gets in the groove should be able to reclaim about 25 to 30 screens per hour is a good target.
All right, so the next step in our process is going to be applying the screen wash. This is going to remove the majority of the ink off our screen as well as degreasing it. You don't need to dilute this. You can just spray it directly on the screen. Some customers opt out to dilute it 1-to-1 if they have a heavier hand, but get a feel for it. Start with without diluting it. So we're going to spray it all over our screen, both sides, and then we're going to let it sit for about 1 minute. So once we apply it, we want to really work it into all the parts of the screen. That's why we're using a scrub brush. Helps us get into the corners, basically. So it's nice circular motions. One part of the screen that is often neglected is the frame. So we want to make sure that we clean off all the ink from the frame itself. Now ready to wash it off. Remember to clean off both sides. And there we have our clean screen with just a 2 chemical process.